How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Ben. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare.
The reason I was late is because I lost track of time because I was watching a Q&A of Tobe Hooper and Karen Black and Hunter Carson at some kind of monster fest about Invaders from Mars. So
what else would the three of them be talking about?
Yeah, that's a good point, and I don't have a witty retort for you, but I don't know. Somebody did ask questions about Poltergeist though, so they managed to switch the conversation. I always feel weird for people when that happens because I'm like, oh, poor Karen Black's over there, just like
she has nothing to do with that movie.
What the fuck am I doing here now? But anyway, I always watch these things in 2x speed. And
I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you listen to podcasts that way either.
Yeah,
it drives
usually
me
like
insane.
1.5 times, but I've moved up to 2 on some things.
It's just so it's too much.
You get used to it, but then what happens is every conversation after, or if you ever move anything to normal speed after, it just sounds like the whole world is drunk. It's just like everybody's like, "Hey, man, what's going on?" Because you're just used to like everybody's in like chipmunk speed, and they don't sound like chipmunks when you go up to 2 times, but it's
it doesn't raise the octave. It's just they talk really fast, like the Micro Machine guy from when we were kids. Remember that guy?
I do remember that guy. What happened to that guy?
Oh, he's probably dead.
Welcome
everybody.
Welcome to Cinema Shock. It's the podcast that explores the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. This episode is dedicated to the memory of the Micro Machine Man.
Oh, he's still around.
Oh, he's still around. Okay.
Yeah, I just looked him up. He's 66 years old.
That changes nothing. This episode is still dedicated to the memory of the Micro Machines Man. All right.
His name is John Moshida.
Moshida?
No, it's
that
not.
Doesn't sound.
That is unfortunate.
I would go by the Micro Machine Man too.
You know what they say? Mo shitta, mo dookie.
Wow. We are off to quite a start on this week's podcast, guys. I mean, we should end it now. There's nowhere to go down from here.
I'm at Mr. Todd Davis on all the socials. Thanks, guys.
Nice. Well, Gary, you got to do the intro to the show. I
already did the intro to the show.
You said, well, hello. This is welcome to Cinema Shock. Did you introduce yourself?
No, I'm one of your hosts, Gary Horn. Hey.
All right. Well, I'm co-host Justin Bishop, and we're joined, as always, by Mr. Todd A. Davis.
Hello.
Also a fan of Micro Machines.
Mm-hmm.
The way you said it, then it sounded
by that I mean
Todd A.
Small penises.
Todd A. Davis.
Do it in a Mario accent.
I'm a Todd Davis.
Yeah, there you go. That's it.
Yeah,
that works.
Joining us today, Italian plumber.
I would also like to start this episode real quick by apologizing to everyone we offended on Return of the Living Dead by making fun of Maggie. I don't know if you guys heard feedback on that, but I did. And they're like, how are you going to make fun of Maggie? And you ain't even seen Maggie. And I can't even believe you haven't seen Maggie. It's got Arnold in it. And I just want to, especially to you, Mr. Odinson on Twitter.
Is he the only one that said something?
No, actually, I heard from another girl too who said like Maggie's really good.
The way you phrased that, you just called Jack Odinson a girl.
No,
you did.
I said another lady.
I heard from some.
Jack another lady.
Said the thing, and I heard from some other girl.
Yeah, I apologize. I meant
Jackie
to call.
Odinson is
he is definitely
a very.
I meant to call him a bitch.
Oh, all right. The thoughts and views of Gary Horn do not necessarily reflect the thoughts and views of Todd A. Davis or Cinema Shock.
I'm wearing a tank top today, and I can definitely tell you, just from looking at myself in the camera, I am not the kind of person I want to see have to tangle with that guy.
Oh man! Well, you guys ready to talk about a little bit more Tobe Hooper?
Yeah.
So this is week two of 3 of our series on covering Tobe Hooper's time with Canon Films. Last week we discussed Life Force. I think we all really enjoyed that movie.
Yeah, it's fun.
And these movies are wild. This is a wild trilogy of films that he's doing. This is the one that I was least familiar with, the one we're talking about this week. I'd seen it, but it had been many, many years. So I'm excited to get into it, guys.
I'm excited to get into it too.
Thanks, Gary. That sounded really authentic. I really appreciate
Yes, I am also excited.
You're so genuine.
I'm nothing but authentic.
So while Tobe Hooper's Life Force, the movie we talked about last week, it was a failure both critically and commercially, but the folks at Canon Films still stood behind their decision to work with the director, continuing to honor their 3-picture deal with him, mostly because, like Gary mentioned last week, they really wanted that Texas Chainsaw sequel that was coming down the pipeline. That was kind of the agreement. Hey, we want you to do 3 movies with us. As long as one of them is Texas Chainsaw, you can kind of do whatever the hell you want. It was sort of like that, although it was also sort of like, here's a book called The Space Vampires. This is probably what you want to do. Although this one didn't quite work out that way. This one was a little more Toby's choice. But when it came time for his follow-up to Life Force, Canon was not going to make the same mistake that they did the first time by throwing an insane amount of money at the project. When his next film went before cameras, it did so with a budget of about $12 million, which is still pretty impressive for the time, but it was less than half of the budget for his previous film. And that film, the one we're talking about today, is yet another tale of alien invasion, although one that's very different from last week's. This one is called Invaders from Mars.
David Gardner just woke up to a nightmare in his own backyard, but no one will listen.
We landed right back there, right behind the hill.
No one will believe.
I told you, he needs psychiatric help.
And soon, no one will be left.
Dad? Are you okay, Dad?
Fine. Because something strange is happening to the people of Willow Creek.
Everything's fine now.
And David Gardner is about to find out why.
David! I'm gonna find my mom and dad! I'm back!
Canon Films presents Tobe Hooper's Invaders from Mars. There's no place on Earth to hide.
Got it bad, got it bad, got it bad. I'm hot for school nurse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You say different from Life Force, but as I recall, none of the aliens in this film are wearing clothes either.
That's very true. That's a good point.
Wow. That Venn diagram's getting a little bigger.
So from the late 70s to the 1980s.
Else.
What? Talking about what you're Wayne?
Talking about my micro machine, Justin.
So from the late 70s to the 1980s, Hollywood saw a rash of remakes of 1950s sci-fi flicks. It's not really a big surprise when you go and look at the trends, like that many of the notable genre directors of the time, they had grown up with that genre. And back in the 1950s, these are movies that they grew up on. So seeing them want to remake them or get attached to remakes wasn't a big surprise because it was their love for the genre that had inspired a lot of them to be filmmakers to begin with. 1978 gave us Philip Kaufman's remake of Don Siegel's Invasion of the Body Snatchers, a really great remake. John Carpenter remade Howard Hawks' The Thing in 1982. You had David Cronenberg remaking The Fly in 1986, Chuck Russell remaking The Blob in 1988. So this was a big trend for about a decade, really. And then Tobe Hooper, for his follow-up to Life Force, would give us a remake of William Cameron Menzies' 1953 film, Invaders from Mars. Now, have you guys seen the original Invaders from Mars?
No.
It's pretty good. It's not great. It's not a perfect film, but it's got some fun ideas. It's got some really fun visuals, some kind of surreal visuals that did kind of bleed over into this film, honestly. It's filled with really great set design and a really good emotional center, thanks to Menzies' decision to show the film from the psychological perspective of a young child. Which was kind of unusual for a sci-fi film of the time. But on the other hand, the film often feels cheap. It was cheap. The makeup effects are pretty bad. You can see the zippers on the costumes of the Martians. The Supreme Intelligence is essentially just a sculpture that doesn't really have any articulation. They use stock footage of the military that they'll cut into the film a lot to kind of pad out the runtime. And the movie's still only like 78 minutes, I think.
Oh, wow.
Well, who cares if you can see the zippers? How else? I know the future's supposed to be all fancy, but how else are you supposed to get out of jumpsuits?
No, it's not. It's like it's supposed to be their skin.
Oh.
Like it's not like they're wearing suits. It's supposed to be the Martian's body. And you can see the zippers on it.
Gotcha.
So, I mean, in essence, this is the perfect kind of movie to remake. One it's not a sacred cow, but it has enough good ideas to warrant someone trying to tell the story again and telling it a bit better.
I saw this story that Wade Williams, one of the producers on this, he like collects all those old movies or something. And
like the original Prince and stuff.
Yeah. And and the rights to them. So he had acquired the rights to Invaders from Mars, and he received for the remake, they paid him like 50 times the amount he had paid for the rights of the movie. And,
wow.
So anyway, he was very loaded off of this.
That's a good investment.
Yeah.
So when he signed on to direct the remake of Invaders from Mars for Canon Films, Hooper, he seemed to be aware of what he was getting himself into by remaking a classic film. Here's what he told Starlog magazine.
I'd considered all the possible remake pitfalls and then developed my own formula for this project that, at least in my mind, diffuses those dangers. The first thing is not to throw away the baby with the bathwater and destroy what was really good in the original, either in spirit or actuality.
I like how you pause every now and then, which is kind of what he does.
Yeah, I was watching that interview today. I picked up more little quirks that he has, like these weird pauses and just like meanders off sometimes. And I don't know. He also will really emphasize a T sometimes. I don't know.
You're getting really into that Tobe Hooper impersonation. So, but by doing this, Tobe Hooper sought to create a film whose plot and characters were pretty similar to the original, but with a wildly different tone. One that was intended to be probably a little more satirical and a little more fantastic and kind of out there than the original one, because as we've seen, out there is kind of where Tobe Hooper seems to thrive.
Oh yeah, he lives there. I mean, some of these films from the 50s, these kind of classic sci-fi, staples of that era. Some of them look really cheap, but at the same time, some of them are really beloved, and I would think that would be a pretty daunting task to take on a project like that, to keep in the spirit of it, but revitalize
it for modern audiences.
Yeah.
I would say though too, what's weird is none of them, when you think about all those movies you mentioned before, none of them seem to really feel beholden to the original at all. They keep sort of a premise, like the initial idea. Yeah, but the Fly and the Thing are totally out there.
Totally different. This one I think probably keeps to the plot of the original a little bit more than those other ones. So Invasion of the Body Snatchers is pretty close. There's only so many variations on that you can do, but for the most part, they take the basic idea and then kind of go in their own direction with it, which is not necessarily not what Hooper's doing here, but he definitely is making this feel still a little bit more like a 50s sci-fi, an updated version of a 50s sci-fi movie. Yeah. But so he was coming at this from the right direction by knowing this is what not to do and what to do to make a successful remake. But getting this intent down in script form proved to be pretty difficult. So Hooper's LifeForce screenwriters, Dan O'Bannon and Don Jacoby, they were hired to write the script. And their original draft relied pretty heavily on flashbacks and featured a young David Gardner who was, in this version, he was a new arrival in town, which made convincing the adults that there was an alien invasion happening around them even more difficult than it would have already been. And then this draft was rewritten by Stuart Schaffman, another screenwriter. He would actually rewrite the script 3 times before assistant directors David Womack and David Lipman took a crack at it. And in the end, the film is credited to O'Bannon and Jacoby with a story credit given to Richard Blake. Richard Blake's the writer of the original 1953 film. Although it's hard to really know how much of O'Bannon and Jacoby's original script actually made it to the screen, since it had been rewritten at least 4 times after they got finished with it.
I was going to say, how do you divide that up? Jeez.
It's super. I didn't catch that before, that that it was around mainly flashbacks, because I did find O'Bannon's script online and I started to read it, but it was like it said it was his second draft or whatever, and but I didn't have a chance to read the whole thing, so I don't know like what major changes happened. But right off the bat, Nurse and the kid are showing up at the military base. And so
at the beginning of the script,
like at the beginning of the script that I saw, and I thought, I was like, am I only getting a part of the script or what? But then it goes back to the parents. So I was like, oh, so you saying that? I'm like, oh yeah, I guess that's what he's doing. He's doing like flashbacks, bouncing around.
So with a script in place, it's time to get some actors for this thing. At the top of the bill for this is Karen Black. I love Karen Black. She was a frequent player in 70s New Hollywood films. She's an easy writer. She's in a lot of films by Robert Altman. She did do some horror throughout later on in her career, including this, but also like Trilogy of Terror is a classic one that she was in, a made-for-TV horror movie. But younger genre fans might probably recognize her most as Mother Firefly from Rob Zombie's House of a Thousand Corpses.
Interestingly enough, if you go to the Oracle of Bacon website to try to find like her, people to get your 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, she is the highest ranked female for under 6 degree connections to Kevin Bacon. She has like 21.
Wow.
Good trivia, Gary. Thank you.
Yeah, I found it on IMDb. Now I'm just going to throw in IMDb trivia every once in a while for like the most like inane trivia facts about something.
that does tend to be what makes up most of the IMDb trivia pages.
Right. Just like, why is this here? But there you go.
So joining Karen Black was Louise Fletcher, best known for her role as Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. She won an Oscar for that. You had Timothy Bottoms, who was in The Last Picture Show, and of course Saturday Night Live alum Lorraine Newman,
who even busts out that Conehead's voice at one point.
She does, and that was actually at the request of Tobe Hooper. Because in the script, it just said that she does that the mom does like an alien voice or a silly voice, and Tobe Hooper actually requested that she do the Conehead's voice, and she didn't want to do it at first, but he talked her into it, and it's great because as soon as I heard it, I was like, that's her, that's Connie Conehead.
Yeah, there you go. Tim Bottoms, by the way, George Bush, and That's My Bush. I don't know who else remembers that, but
that was him.
Yeah, that's
I remember that. That was the Trey Parker and Matt Stone TV show that lasted for like a season.
Yeah, exactly. It was not
Did he play George Bush?
But he was Bush.
I can see that. I mean, just picturing him in my head, I can see that.
But perhaps his most timeless role is that of Melissa Joan Hart's father in Holiday in Handcuffs.
So. Oh my God! For our
immediately, I recognized him.
For our listeners who don't know, because I don't think we've ever discussed this on the show, but Gary is obsessed with the I'd say made for TV, right?
It's a made for TV movie. Yeah.
Holiday film, Holiday in Handcuffs, starring Melissa Joan Hart and Mario Lopez.
I was going to say, isn't that Mario Lopez? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the Gary. Like some of us watch, Christmas Vacation every year. Some of us watch It's a Wonderful Life. Some of us might watch Die Hard every year. Gary, without fail, will watch Holiday in Handcuffs at some point during the Christmas season.
It's a Christmas classic. It was made for like, I don't know what one of those
Hallmark
like,
channel.
It wasn't. I don't think it's Hallmark.
It was Hallmark. Maybe Lifetime or something.
Maybe Lifetime.
Or it seems like a Freeform or ABC Family.
I was about to say it could be like ABC Family or like.
It seems like
one of those. But yeah.
How old is it at this point? Because that's.
I mean, I bet it's like. Yeah, I'd bet it's like 08 or 07 or something. Now I feel
all
like
three of us are sitting in front of computers.
I know. I was about to say now I have to know. So
2007. It was 2007. And it was on ABC Family.
ABC Family. I see, and I knew enough to know 07 felt like the right time period. It feels like an 07 made for TV movie, but in all the best ways.
Oh,
I'm not sure what those are.
all of them, all of the best ways. Okay.
Who knew that the Invaders from Mars episode would go down this rabbit hole?
So also appearing in smaller roles, you had Jimmy Hunt, he plays the police chief here, but he played the kid. He played David Gardner in the original Invaders from Mars. And he didn't really act after the original one, but they asked him to come back to do a little cameo in this one. And then, of course, you've got James Karen, the great James Karen, who we talked about a couple weeks ago on Return of the Living Dead. He was also in Tobe Hooper's Poltergeist. He plays Craig T. Nelson's his boss in that one, but he's here as the general and is, as he usually is, just amazing, I think.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
Yeah,
He's
great.
really great.
Jimmy Hunt gets that like little clever line in there where they first go to check out the spaceship thing, and there's like, "Oh, this hill, like I haven't been up here since I was a kid."
Yeah. It's clever if you know who he is. And then landing in the lead role of David Gardner was Karen Black's real life son, Hunter Carson. Carson had previously gotten acclaim for his role in Them Vendors Paris, Texas, which came out a year earlier. But he wasn't like a super, experienced actor. And Tobe Hooper had known him and Karen Black for a long time and had not really considered casting him in a role until he had seen Paris, Texas. And Carson's father and Karen Black's ex-husband was writer L.M. Carson. So Carson and Hooper, we talked about this a while back, but Carson and Hooper had nearly collaborated much earlier in Hooper's career. Back in our Eaten Alive episode, we were kind of discussing the time period before Eaten Alive, but after Texas Chainsaw Massacre, when Hooper was trying to get some projects off the ground, and he came close to collaborating on a film called Dead and Alive with L.M. Kit Carson and William Friedkin. And so for more on that movie, we actually go into like what the plot and everything's about in that episode, but go back and check out our Eaten Alive episode. But I will say that this is not the last mention of Carson's name alongside Hooper's in this series.
Yeah, they must be kind of close because he mentions in that Q&A I was watching that it all just kind of came together because while they were filming Life Force at Elstree Studios, Karen Black came by to visit, and she brought the kid with her. And it was like, oh, he was just in this movie. You got to check it out. And he was like, so they talked there that's kind of where it was just like, oh yeah, well, we'll get him for the next one or whatever. That's kind of how it all came together. But just interesting how these things bounce from project to project. But William Bassett,
nepotism. That's what it is.
Yeah, that's true.
Just a bunch of nepotism.
You're not wrong.
William Bassett is also in there randomly as one of the NASA guys who doesn't even get a name, I don't think, but they're at the end, and he's in all kinds of shit too. But like also in House of a Thousand Corpses, he's the sheriff who sends the two guys to the house to help out. Like his old buddy is the dad of the girl, and he's trying to find out what happened to her. And anyway,
yeah,
he's got like all long hair and he's like kind of a redneck. But anyway.
Well, you also had like Bud Cort is in there, who's like a well-known character actor. He's in some Robert Altman's movies. He's Harold and Maude, like he's been around for a long time, but he plays the kind of the nerdy, like the NASA scientist, with the mustache. That's Bud Cort, who's really, he's pretty fun in this, but he's, a very prolific actor who's been working. I think he's still working now even, but been working probably since the 60s. He was in MASH.
Nice.
That guy Rinaldi, that cop, if he looks familiar to you, he did to me, and I looked him up. He was he's the Pawnee police chief in Parks and Rec. So.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's fun. So filming for Invaders from Mars commenced in Southern California. The Gardner house was actually a house that was built for a Cary Grant movie. Called like Our Dream House or something. I didn't write it down, but that house, it was built for another movie, and it was
Cary Grant popping up all over the place too. Look at this guy dancing on his grave and now fucking around in his house.
But that house was on. It was located in Malibu Canyon State Park. Although the iconic hillside that you see, which is on the poster for the movie, which was modeled after the hill in the original film, that was on a stage-bound set filmed at a place called Hollywood Center Stages, which actually used to be owned by Francis Ford Coppola. It was Zoetrope Studios, which went bankrupt after One from the Heart. But that's a whole nother story that deserves its own full episode, probably, because that period of Francis Ford Coppola's career is pretty fascinating. But so they filmed it there. And then the massive interiors, the sets for the interiors of the Martian spaceship, they were located on this place called Terminal Island, which was this large artificial island in Los Angeles County. They needed somewhere big enough to put all of these in one building, basically, and they filmed it inside of an airplane hangar, this massive airplane hangar that was used to house the Spruce Goose.
The one of Howard
Hughes's,
yeah.
It was like the world's biggest airplane at the time. It had like a single flight, I think.
Yeah.
And but that's how big this airplane hangar was, and that's where they filmed the interior for the Martian spaceship.
Wow. Yeah, that's cool.
That Martian ship design was courtesy of production designer Leslie Dilley, another kind of legend, and art director Craig Stearns. Both of them were veterans in their field. Craig Stearns had gotten his start as an art director on John Carpenter's The Fog back in the early 1980s. And Invaders was actually his last credit as an art director before moving into production design full-time, which he still does today, mostly works in television now. And then Les Dilley is an absolute legend in the world of production design, who had actually, like Stearns, started his career as an art director. He worked on films you may have heard of, like Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, Richard Donner's Superman, Raiders of the Lost Ark, An American Werewolf in London. He worked alongside Ridley Scott and H.R. Giger on Alien. He worked on Ridley Scott's Legend.
Some fairly familiar movies.
Yes. Some that there might be a couple of deep cuts in there, but so the guy's incredible. Basically, he's great at his job. And Invaders was actually one of his first credits as a production designer, but he would later be credited as a production designer on genre classics like The Abyss, The Exorcist 2, Casper. Remember Casper with Christina Ricci? He did that. He also did Son of the Mask. So they can't all be winners. I think he did that Little Man movie with Damon Wayans, where he was like Damon Wayans played a baby. Remember that one? So sometimes a production designer's got to get work where he can. They can't all be. It can't all be Star Wars.
Yeah,
that's wild.
Ooh.
And behind the camera, Hooper was reunited with his Texas Chainsaw Massacre cinematographer Daniel Pearl. Hooper and Daniel Pearl are like best friends. The two had also worked together on the Billy Idol music video that we mentioned last week, Dancing with Myself. But this was technically only the second movie that they had done together.
Yeah, he kind of went off onto like music videos. Like
he did a lot of music videos and commercials. Yeah.
Yeah, he was just like, I mean, it would be obnoxious to try to list everybody from like
name four.
Styx, Bruce Springsteen, Guns N' Roses. Like he did "Don't Cry." Remember that? Meatloaf. He did the cinematography. I do anything for love, but I won't do
That's
that.
That's a good video.
Yeah,
it's a great video.
He did like all.
No, that was Ford. That was Ford. That's enough.
Yeah, no, all of Boys to Men. Every Boys to Men music video this guy did.
Wow. Well, here's what Pearl had to say about this new collaboration with Tobe Hooper. It says, quote, "There are several points in the picture where we go for shots very similar to those found in the first film. Hooper and I have an excellent rapport. Our minds frequently click on the same images, and we tend to fall in love with them, even though there's often pressure to abandon shots, especially trick shots, because they take up more time. But these are the types of shots that we both take delight in conceiving and executing." So these guys, they're of a like mind. They're both wanting to experiment. They're both wanting to do some cool shit, even when the producers might not want them to because it's unnecessary.
That quote sounds like they could be talking about porn.
Like trick shots? Is that like a
like
shot?
Frequently click on the same images. We tend to fall in love. There's often
Are you talking about just
abandoned
browsing
shots,
for porn on the
especially
internet?
trick shots? Like, I mean,
I don't understand where you're
just
going
saying,
with this
I'm
topic. Please
saying.
continue explaining.
Look, Gary, pull up Pornhub.
So type in this title.
Search trick shots.
Kind of want to do that.
I'm so curious now. I'm so curious what would come up.
Pornhub.
So we would be remiss if we discussed Invaders from Mars without discussing its creature effects. While the work of John Dykstra's back for this one. He worked on Life Force. He was not happy with how it turned out, but he came back. And his work here is impressive, but I think the real star here is the creature design by Stan Winston Studios.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that guy.
Not long after he'd signed on to do the creatures in Invaders from Mars, Winston signed on to do another huge production, which is James Cameron's Aliens, one of the most anticipated sequels of all time, one that Stan Winston would eventually go on to win an Oscar for. And with the weight of these two projects kind of hanging over him, he had to considerably expand his crew. He hired a bunch of people. So at this point, when he's working on Invaders from Mars, he's got like 40 guys working under him. Pretty big operation. And Winston's studio was in charge of designing both the Invader drones, those are the big Mr. Potato Head looking guys, as the kid calls them, and the Supreme Being. He's the one that looks like Krang from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, surely you guys, I'm not the only one that made that connection.
No, I definitely was like,
as soon as he showed up on screen, I was like, Krang got some more work. Congrats.
Yeah. He's like, I'm always typecast as an alien, though.
I'll be putting out an album later this month. I can do more things.
It's kind of a shame they've never put Krang into any of the Ninja Turtle movies.
Wasn't he in the second one of the
new ones?
Yeah.
I don't know if I saw that one. Or if I did, I forgot.
Yeah, I think we both sort of forgot, but I think we both liked it.
Rocksteady.
Yeah, Bebop and Rocksteady.
Right. I don't remember Krang though. Yeah. I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch it.
Yep. We'll do a whole series. We'll do a series on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies, and then Todd will be so stoked. I was gonna point out though that I did in that Q&A. I did not know this either, but apparently Hooper went to Rick Baker first for the effects.
Yeah, he went to Rick Baker and Rob Bottin.
Yeah, he said then Rob Bottin, and then both of them had recommended Stan Winston.
Yeah, they were both booked and like they were too busy. They already had other projects coming down the line. So work on Aliens had actually already begun when Stan Winston took on Invaders. Though Winston had committed to Invaders earlier, but Aliens got off the ground first. But that apparently annoyed James Cameron because he thought that it would take focus away from his project. But on the contrary, when you hear Stan Winston and people from his crew talk about it, it sounds like working on the two simultaneously allowed Winston to pull ideas from one to the other. So one of the big ones was, according to Stan Winston, he said, inspired by the Alien Queen concept from Aliens or for Aliens, Winston wanted to figure out how, like, other ways of putting two performers in a suit. Like how if you use two performers in one suit, you could kind of disguise the fact that there's a person inside of the creature design, right. Basically doing a man in suit without it looking like a man in suit. This is a quote from Stan Winston. He says, quote, "I wanted to create an alien invader that didn't look like a guy in a suit. So I came up with this idea of putting a little person on the back of a big guy who would stand and walk backwards." So basically this concept, you can find pictures of it online, but it looks like a backpack sort of. And you've got a stuntman, like a big stuntman with this backpack contraption and then a little person on the back. And one of the little people, by the way, who did that was Tony Cox from the Bad Santa movies.
Oh, nice.
Okay.
And
cool.
and like I think he's on Seinfeld and stuff. But yeah, he was one of the performers in the suits. So, but I've also heard, now that's a quote that I just read directly from Stan Winston, the Stan Winston School website, where they have an entire article about the making of this movie and behind the scenes on their work on this movie. You can find some really cool pictures on there. So I would recommend checking that out. But so that's what they say as far as where this design came from. But I also heard that this idea actually originated with William Stout. William Stout, you guys remember, he was a big part of Return of the Living Dead. He was the conceptual artist on that. He designed the Tar Man. He was basically Dan O'Bannon's right-hand man on this on that movie, and he was a conceptual artist on this movie. And according to William Stout, he had spoken to Rick Baker, who, like Gary mentioned, had been originally approached to work on this film, and they were kind of talking this over just as colleagues and friends, and Baker told him that the problem with a guy in a suit is that it always looks like a guy in a suit, which he's right. 9 times out of 10, it does. So Stout says that he came up with the idea of having them walk backwards and then took that idea to Stan Winston. Now maybe it was Stan Winston's idea to put the other person, the other performer, on the back. That's very well possible. But the idea of walking backwards in the suit seems to have originated with William Stout. because and what the final product ended up looking like was you had the little person on the back facing forward, or what was the front of the alien creature, and they would be able to manipulate the face basically like a big puppet using their arms and legs. And then a large stunt person would walk backwards, which created a non-human leg joint, like a backwards leg joint, like a chicken, where the joint's backwards. So that's kind of where that comes from, which is really pretty damn clever.
It's clever. I mean, I even saw where like Hunter Carson was asking Tobe Hooper, like, how do these things exist? And so Tobe Hooper's like, oh, I'll show you. And like took him over to the suit, and they unzipped like part of it or whatever and opened it up. And he was like, there's a bodybuilder inside with a little person strapped to his back. And like, he's standing on like some kind of plank that operates the mouth. And it's just like, it sounds like a Mad Max thing or something.
And it's wild because I did find myself anytime they were on screen, like really focusing on the movement, because I couldn't at first was like, wait a minute, how are they doing that? And looking at the setup around the actual foot of, well, I guess the bodybuilder guy, and then looking at where his arms would be, which I guess are the back legs. He's got
he's using like ski pole kind of things.
Yeah.
For the back.
It's wild. I like it.
It's pretty crazy. It's a pretty crazy design. But then the design of the drones themselves created an issue. Like, these things are huge. They're so big that building them out of foam latex like you normally would was impossible, because foam latex has to be cooked in an oven, and there simply weren't any ovens big enough to accommodate the size of these things. So instead, they had to come up with a way to inject foam into large fiberglass molds. So one of the crew members, a creature effects artist named Rick Lazzarini, he came up with this concept that he called the octo injector.
Here comes the trick shot.
There's a little layup for you.
Thank you.
The octo injector, though, was basically, the way they described it, as a big 5-gallon bucket that had multiple hoses coming out of it. I guess 8 of them, since it's called the octo. And then they'd have 6 crew members sitting around with 1-gallon buckets. They'd mix up the foam and then dump it into this thing and cap the lid, and then shoot compressed air into it, which allowed them to inject foam into multiple points all around this mold. It's really kind of like super innovative and super crazy to think about. Like, I'd love to see footage of that happening.
Like a one-man bukkake.
Well, it's 6-man.
Well, yeah, I guess
there are 6 of them. So like a normal bukkake.
Yeah, you can search for that on Pornhub.
Yeah, you can search for anything on Pornhub if you want. Whether you'll find it or not, or whether you'll be put on a list, that's another matter. So for the Supreme Being, that's the Krang looking guy, Winston's crew built a puppet with an animatronic face and bladders built inside of the puppet to simulate breathing. Because this thing, it's pretty big. Like, he's got this big serpent-like tail, that you don't see a lot of, but the actual puppet is pretty big. And so they built that, and his crew worked every weekend for weeks to finish up their work on Invaders from Mars before having to leave for the alien shoot. Now, not the whole crew left. Obviously, they've still got people from Stan Winston's studio on set operating this every day, but Stan Winston himself left to go work on Aliens because James Cameron asked him to come into Aliens. He checked with Tobe Hooper to make sure it was okay, and Tobe Hooper felt that they were in good hands with the rest of his crew. So a guy named Alec Gillis ended up kind of supervising a lot of the shoot.
I was going to bring him up because he kind of got in on Stan Winston Studios, but this guy had been on lots of creature effects. Like, I mean, he was like, I think his first movie was Jaws 3D, but he'd been on Cocoon, which we talked about a little bit, like competing with Life Force prior, but they did Invaders from Mars. But he also helped out on Aliens and Monster Squad and
Tremors,
like
he did Tremors,
all this crap. I mean, he was working on stuff as nice. Recently as Godzilla versus Kong. Like, he was he's an effects supervisor there. And
if you look at his filmography, it's sort of insane. Like a bunch of iconic creatures and it's a lot of stuff with animatronics that you probably remember growing up. Like, he very likely had a hand in, what is it? Mars Attacks. That's the one I was trying to think of. Mars Attacks, like incredible work, a pretty incredible filmography.
Nice. I found a quote from him talking about this movie, and he talks about the size of the drones and that kind of thing, and just how big they were. And he said, he mentions like some of the stuff you're talking about the latex, the foam latex being bigger than anybody had, and Rick Lazzarini coming up with the octo injector. The quote he was talking about, he's like, so 6 of us would sit around with 1 gallon buckets, mix up the polyfoam, to dump it into this thing, cap the lid, shoot compressed air into it, which allowed us to inject polyfoam into the multiple points around the mold. We got our skids out, and they were good enough to be patched together. And it was a very big and bold thing to do, though. Stan was never one to take the safest route. He would always say, there's got to be a way. And then we'd brainstorm. Every idea was heard, every idea discussed. It was invigorating. Not so invigorating was the noxious gas emanating from the polyfoam drone creatures. We were in a small room. He was like, we were running giant pieces with little ventilation. And on our lunch breaks, we'd lie right on top of these big bodies we were making because they were soft and cushy, and they were secreting cyanide gas. So we'd be laying around going, man, I don't feel so good. But it was for me.
They were poisoning themselves.
He's like, we knew that it was toxic stuff, but we'd just like stare at it, be like, hey, look, gas is coming out of this polyfoam. And it's like, we thought we were taking some precautions, but we were also young and stupid.
And that was one of the issues that they had. That was prior to filming. During the filming, one of the issues they had, kind of a problem they had to solve, was the problem of the Martian blood. So going into the movie, it was kind of understood that this was intended to be a family-friendly movie. So just bright red blood spurting out of the Martians when they get shot wasn't going to cut it. So instead, they decided that the Martian blood would be a combination of yellow and lavender colored fluids. They weren't able to use corn syrup as a base, which is what you would normally use for fake blood, because the art department was worried about it staining the sets because they would have big puddles of it, And this is in the Martian spaceship, which was this immaculately, detailed set. But then someone on Stan Winston's team found a solution, and it was slime. So there was, you guys might remember this because you're my age, and I remember this stuff. I probably had some of it, but there was this popular toy by Mattel back in the 80s called Slime. It was sold in what looked like plastic trash cans, like green plastic trash cans, with the and the motto on it said, it's goopy, drippy, oozy, cold, and clammy, which happens to also be the motto for Gary's mom's vagina.
Wow. Good one. You got that in there. Okay. All right. Thought we were laying off mamas, but
no, that was only during Mother's Day. We're laying on mamas.
That's on Pornhub.
Stepmoms.
Oh, that's right. Stepmoms.
It's all stepmoms.
So, it's gross otherwise, right? Like, so
yeah.
Can't
So
be
listen,
real
we're not
sister.
weirdos. Listen, we're not weirdos. We only use our micro machines on stepmoms.
So the production ended up buying gallons and gallons of the substance that was used as Slime's base. So without the green coloring that was used on the final product, because the final one, it came out, it's green, it's slime. It looks like the stuff from Nickelodeon. Without that, the slime was translucent white, and the effects team soon began to affectionately refer to it as bulges.
I don't see what's so funny about that.
Also on Pornhub.
The stuff ended up being perfect because it took the color well, and they could make the 2 separate colors, the yellow and the lavender, and they could swirl them around on set without them mixing together. And they could pour it into thick puddles that could easily be kind of controlled, where they knew exactly where the puddle was going to lie. And it basically peeled off the floor with little to no cleanup needed. So it kind of worked out perfectly for them.
Nice.
There was one incident on set, one major incident, somewhat major, where it's towards the end of the movie where the Marines are assaulting the throne room where the Supreme Intelligence lives,
Mm-hmm.
So one of the effects performers, a guy named Gino Crognale, he was the one who was controlling the Supreme Intelligence. And the way that they had to do it, because of the shape of that thing, is basically they had him in a like Superman flying pose on a board, and they strapped him and duct taped him onto this board, and he would control the puppet from the inside. So they'd have guys like lifting for the parts where the thing has to lift up. They'd have guys in the back lifting the board, making them fly about. But it was basically a big puppet with an animatronic face.
Mm.
So they're filming this scene where he's getting shot and he has to kind of react to it. They yell action, explosions start going off, little squibs start blowing up, blood spurts of colored glycerine. And then all of a sudden, there's actual fire. And at some point, a spark from one of the squibs had hit the flammable paint on set, and pretty soon burning debris was raining down from the walls of the set. So luckily, another one of the members of the creature effects crew, a guy named Dave Nelson, he was thinking quick on his feet, and he pulled out a pocket knife and cut Gino Cognali out of the suit because he had no idea what was going on. He's performing. Nobody ever yelled cut. He's performing, and all of a sudden, from his point of view, a knife cuts the suit open and people are pulling him out. He had no idea, and he looks up and the wall's on fire.
Oh, jeez. Wow.
So
after
what
people do for art.
Hey, it's dangerous sometimes.
Hooper talks about that. He's like, we could have burned down most of LA with that thing. Like he was like, it just he's like, with all those tunnels, the way they were going and everything. And he was like, luckily, they called it and it turned into nothing. But he also talks about those guys walking in the drones being, the way they were able to see was they had little monitors inside.
Yeah, you can find photos of that. Like when they put them in the suit, there's like a video monitor kind of right under their face where they could watch what was going on because they're walking backwards.
He was saying in that interview that like they were 40 feet up in the air. So like he was like, they could have technically walked incorrectly and just
because there's no bars on the scaffold. There's on the edges of that set because it's elevated, where the Supreme Being is. Well, that set was, Hooper had wanted it to be even more elaborate than it was. I mean, it's pretty damn elaborate the way it ended up in the movie, but his original concept for it was that like everything would be very like organic, which it looks organic. But his original version was it was going to be like 3 stories tall, and the walls would like pulse like it was an organic being.
Oh wow!
And they just didn't have the budget for that, so they weren't able to do that. They kind of had to abandon that concept and turn it into what we got, which still looks really cool. And it still kind of looks organic, but not like it was before. Before it looked like you were basically in the belly of a whale, like you're Jonah in the belly of a whale. Like you would see what looked like bones on the ceiling and things like that. It was really wild and honestly like feels, I don't know if Hooper was inspired by Alien, but I definitely feel like H.R. Giger. I mean, that's a very organic design.
Well, hearing the description made me think of Alien, the stuff from Alien.
Yeah. I saw one writer refer to the design as H.R. Giger meets R.L. Stein, which I thought was pretty great.
So that makes me think about another thing. Did you see anything about, because I couldn't delve into this anymore, but apparently I forget the canon guys' names.
Golan
and Globus, yeah.
Golan and Globus, yep.
That they were kind of, and this is probably more for like as we get to the release, I guess, but they were kind of expecting Tobe to stick to horror, and Tobe wanted to make a family-friendly movie. And so that was kind of a dispute that they had during this time.
So they didn't. I kind of always assumed that they maybe wanted it to be kid friendly to reach a wider audience.
Yeah, I read that in an article, and I was gonna
I don't know. That was just my assumption.
But yeah, it just that they had like kind of a dispute about that. Like they felt like Tobe had kind of betrayed them once they saw the final product.
Huh. Interesting. Well, after the sequence where the Marines, assault the Supreme Intelligence, the shooting in that throne room scene was done, and they moved on to the next set, which was the tunnels, the underground tunnels, and they needed an extra hand for some reason when they were doing this. So special makeup effects artist on film, a guy who was Everett Burrell, he called in a friend of his to help out and give them an extra hand. And this kid shows up. Alec Gillis comes up to him and goes, "Hey, you're that young rich kid from Pittsburgh, aren't you?" And it was Greg Nicotero.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And Greg Nicotero worked for the rest of the shoot on this movie. Yeah,
that's cool. Yeah. Just it's so weird how much crossover there is in all these things.
It's a small world. The world of film is pretty small when you really start to see all the connections.
I will say this, just so we get one of these in here and we don't lose the whole film without a reference to Star Trek. Bud Cort in the basement of the elementary school is using this like scanning device, and it is apparently straight off the set of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Saavik is using it when they go investigate the Regular One station where with Captain Kirk and Dr. McCoy when they're
that's fun.
Yeah, but it's like the exact same device. They just took it.
They just borrowed it.
Yeah. They just borrowed
well, speaking of fun little references like that, though, what's his name? The guy who played the kid in the original one. What was his name? Jimmy Hunt, who played David Gardner in the original movie. So when he came to set, he had a prop from the original film, and it was the Supreme Intelligence, which looks like Martian Manhunter, kind of like he's got like the big, not Martian Manhunter, Brainiac. Brainiac, is he the one with the big head?
Yeah.
Kind of looks like that, but with little like tentacles coming out, but it's in like this kind of clear globe. That's what the original Supreme Intelligence looked like. And he owned it. Like I don't know how he got a hold of it, but he owned it and he brought it to set. So when him and the other police are like searching, and they search like I think it's in a barn or something, they're shining their flashlights around. They shine their flashlight directly on the original Supreme Intelligence from the first movie. Yeah.
Nice.
It's kind of
pretty
a
awesome.
fun little Easter egg in there.
Yeah.
So aside from a slight fire on set, the shoot for Invaders of Mars went relatively smooth. It came in on time and on budget. And also like Life Force, when it was released in the summer of 1986, it fared pretty poorly at the box office. Nobody went to see it. So ironically, though, while Life Force seems to have suffered, at least in part, from audiences who were more invested in, like we talked about last week, in kind of the more cuddly, friendly aliens like E.T., Invaders from Mars got slaughtered by a group of bigger, fatter extraterrestrials, namely James Cameron's Aliens, including the creatures designed and built by Stan Winston.
Well, let's face it, the xenomorphs would fuck up all of these people. So
they would destroy the Martian drones. But it probably didn't help that Invaders from Mars had a pretty lackluster ad campaign and pretty spotty distribution. Audiences just did not go see the movie, despite the fact that it received pretty good reviews from critics and publications like the New York Times, the New York Post, the LA Times. They all gave it good reviews, but people just weren't going to see it. I mean, and if you look at the original poster, like much like Life Force, it's pretty underwhelming. It's an image of that hill, with the little fence and some lights coming up behind it, but no spaceship, no Martians. Like, it's a pretty boring poster. Granted, at least the title of this one told you exactly what you were getting.
That's true.
Yeah, Hooper talks a lot about in some stuff about the marketing part of canon. He said that he's like, a lot of people don't appreciate there's a real art to distribution and marketing and that sort of thing. And he's like, in canon, he said he wasn't sure, but he thinks canon at the time was doing all of that themselves, and they just failed at it. Yeah, they were not very good at it.
Invaders was even nominated for a couple of Razzies, the Golden Raspberry Award, which I think we all hate. I know I hate it.
Were they doing Razzies back then?
Oh, yeah, they've been doing Razzies. Yeah, I just said they were nominated for a couple of Razzies.
I mean, yeah, but I didn't know if that was like after the fact. I was, how old are the Razzies?
No, they weren't around back then. That's what's even more fucked up.
they went back. They went back and decided, you know what? Fuck that movie from 1986.
I'm with you, though, Todd. Like, I didn't know until we started doing this show that the Razzies had been around as long as they had.
The Razzies have been around since 1981.
I just thought it was like, I had initially thought it was like a more recent thing that people were being dicks.
No, people have been dicks since the dawn of humanity. But it got a couple of Razzies. One was for Worst Supporting Actress for Louise Fletcher, which I think is insane because I think she's awesome in this. She's kind of doing a variation on Nurse Ratched, but she's fun. I think she's great in this. She plays the role really well. She's a really good sport because she's, again, an Oscar winner who allows herself to get eaten by a giant alien thing,
She eats a whole frog.
A frog
she eats a frog, which she didn't want to do at first. She didn't want to do that. And Tobe Hooper talked her into it. It was this frog made of like a gelatin, and she said it tasted like horrible, but she had to be talked into doing that scene because she's like, I'm a fucking Oscar winner. I was in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But it also was nominated for a Razzie for worst special effects, which is even more insane to me because you could say a lot of things about this movie. I don't see how you talk shit about the special effects because they're great. The creature effects are pretty awesome.
I can't believe that. That seems ridiculous.
Isn't that crazy?
I mean, if anything, the one thing you can count on is that Tobe Hooper movies look pretty cool. Like he ends up getting some good people involved, and the effects are usually pretty fun.
Yeah. So I guess this brings us to the point of the show where we have to look and see, the Razzie Awards might not have liked it, but other reviewers and newspapers at the time did really enjoy the movie. But I also have to wonder what modern internet reviewers had to think of this movie. And I think Gary might have the answer to that.
Oh, I'm sure I do, because as always, you can count on the internet for people to just blow things way out of proportion. And you really learn that when it comes to humanity, somebody needs a nap.
I need a nap from humanity, to be honest.
You get some decent ones, just straightforward. Like this one says, pointless remake offers elaborate monsters, but they still look awful. And film is too stupid and unpleasant to work with a really crass ending that renders the whole film moot. Forget this junk. That was pretty straightforward. Divine here I don't think it's the same Divine, by the way. On IMDb says, well, it was pretty bad. The aliens are fake. I mean, really fake. I swear that you can see a guy in the monster costume on one of the aliens. Also, it had a bad story. I usually like it when there's about 10 minutes of suspense before the aliens arrive in alien movies. In here, it's basically instant. Also, the parents have stammered speech when they get overtaken by the aliens. Also, the acting is mediocre in the action scenes. The kid shows no expression whatsoever when there are explosions and similar things going on right next to him. I think it would have had potential were there some better acting and a little better graphics. I would not recommend this movie to anyone but someone who wishes to be really disappointed.
Well, I don't know what they mean by graphics. This isn't a fucking video game.
That's what I was just thinking too.
But also, would they have been more satisfied if Tobe Hooper had cast real aliens? Because they seem to have a big gripe with the aliens being fake.
Yeah. This one says, this is terribly awful. I didn't like the original, and this was about 20 times worse. It contains senseless cursing from an all-American family and a terrible child actor saying it. It's like they took the corniness of the first and thought, hey, this needs to be even more cornier. The special effects were better, but not good, even for the 80s. I did appreciate how they gave the big brain thing more of a part because I felt the first one, he wasn't around enough. Yeah, there's no reason you should ever watch this.
That person needs to work on their grammar, I'll be honest.
But just quickly, I did find that some of the best 1 stars, we were talking about this early on, come from Letterboxd, and all these are from Letterboxd. Here's Ultimate Whip saying, instead of watching this film, you should do a load of watching and perhaps think about why you don't call your parents as often as you should. Ash Tricky says, Invasion of the Body Snatchers meets Dennis the Menace, but less good than that.
That's good.
A. Moosin says, it was poo. Practical effects are really nice, though. Pointless, unbelievably pointless. As the main character, they say David so often in this film said, they chased me all over town, and that's the entire film. Them ineffectively running away from people for like an hour of the runtime. It's bizarre, astonishingly boring. Child actor can't act. Nobody even really tries to act. And what's the fucking deal with the U.S. military showing up and taking over the film like it's got oil in it? Poo.
Poo.
Michael Pope says, Golden Globe has sure loved throwing money at Tobe Hooper to make shit films. Andrea Gergeroff says, motherfuck this movie.
Talked about this. It's stepmoms. Stepmotherfucker.
And last but not least, I have Coyote Fugly, who says, the trouble with making an homage to shitty 50s sci-fi is that you can be too good at your job and end up making shitty 80s sci-fi.
They're not wrong. But I've noticed that a recurring theme in a lot of these reviews is that they don't like Hunter Carson.
Yeah.
What did you guys think of Hunter Carson as a child actor?
I was happy to see all these people hate him because I thought he sucked.
He does suck.
Yeah.
He was like this movie's what's his face from the last one. You know, I just forgot the friggin' guy's name.
Sounds like you forgot the movie we watched last time too.
Life Force is the name of the movie. Hold on.
Steve Railsback.
Railsback. God, why couldn't I think of Railsback? Yeah, he was like that in this. And what it made me think, well, I could rant about this in just a second if you want, Todd, if you want to say something.
Well, yeah, the kid's pretty bad. Yeah, I can't see anybody really having legitimate complaints about the practical effects. I have some stories about some of the, I mean, again, in a movie that's called Invaders from Mars, I have some story questions, and there were a couple of real awkward moments between the kid and the nurse. Like, if you don't know that that's actually the mom and son, like there's some real some real
stepmom kind of.
Yeah, how this hasn't been made into a porn parody, I don't know, because it's,
well, the child is 8 years old, so
well, that
I think in the parody you wouldn't hire an 8-year-old.
But I mean, I gotta say, I did get a kick out of when he comes out of his bedroom and then runs across to the parents' room, like,
dude, I'm so glad you said that. That was going to be one of the things I point out. It's like every time that kid runs, he's doing that Kevin McAllister Home Alone run where his arms are like swinging and he's like,
like
ridiculous.
Kermit the Frog when he gets excited.
Yes. Oh my God.
I'm like, what is wrong with this fucking kid?
Yeah, the kid's pretty bad, and I have a pretty low tolerance for child actors. They just get on my nerves most of the time, like, because they always seem to be acting like like you'll see a kid doing, it feels like they're doing a school play, like in
swinging
really
for
over
fences, man.
Like I watched Psycho Gorman last night, which is fucking great, by the way, and the girl who's the lead is pretty entertaining, but she's never believable as, like, you never believe that it's not a kid acting, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
like she's acting with a capital A for the whole movie. Now she's pretty funny.
She has good lines.
She has great dialogue, and she's good. I mean, she's not good as an actress in it necessarily, but she's very entertaining in it, and she does her job well. Anyway, that was my mini review of Psycho Gorman. You should see it. It's very good.
I'm the heckin' best. Yeah,
that song was stuck in my head all night.
It's been stuck in my head for I don't know how many weeks ago I saw that movie, but it's still there.
Yeah, it's a great movie. Gary, you said you had a little rant to go on about something.
Well, I mean, I say rant. It's not so much a rant. It's just an observation now that I think I've just come to terms with on Tobe Hooper. And it's just that I think that he's not an actor's director, right? Like
I've thought that same thing.
Yeah, he's unique. He has vision. Like he definitely has all of that. He has the willingness to go weird, and he's unafraid of that. And I think that that's what makes his movies memorable later. But at the time, maybe not as popular, but later on it makes them stand out amongst the hundreds and hundreds of movies that come out, is that Tobe Hooper's movies are unique in the way that they feel and look and that sort of thing. But he's not good with actors. Like he's well, I don't know. I can't think of a single one of these movies that he's been, that you would say like, oh, this, he really brought this out of him. Like the acting was astounding.
I mean, I don't disagree with that. I think that when you, especially that same idea came to mind for me when I was watching Steve Railsback in Life Force, because an actor's director would have either gotten a better performance out of him or B, cast a better actor.
Right.
I do think that Tobe Hooper's gotten incredibly lucky on some films to have good actors cast, like Neville Brand in Eaten Alive, you know, or even Robert Englund in Eaten Alive.
That was the other point I was going to make, is that, yeah, it's like the things that have stood out for him is sometimes he has managed to get the right people that.
Right. Or Kevin Conway in Funhouse, or, you know, even Marilyn Burns, you know, he casts good actors, but it feels like that's more like luck sometimes.
It's the exception, not the standard.
Well, I mean, it's not like every actor in this movie is bad. I mean, I think that the kid is bad, but I think everyone else is fine. I think James Karen is fucking great. I think Karen Black is good in it, although it's a very subdued performance for Karen Black. Like, if you're at all familiar with what she normally does. And the mom and dad, like Lorraine Newman and what's his name? Timothy Bottoms. I think they're fine in it. I think Timothy Bottoms is actually pretty fun in the early parts of the movie, but then later on, they're supposed to be kind of drones anyway. So, you know, when they're in their regular mom and dad mode, they're pretty good. But when they're drones, they're kind of not supposed to be acting normal anyway. So it works.
You know what's crazy is like watching this, and it's the same thing with like Poltergeist. Like, there's memorable people in Poltergeist that somehow managed to like stand out and all of that. I swear to God, besides Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and listen, I've had fun with Eaten Alive. I thought that was a blast. I thought, I mean, Poltergeist is obviously famous for a reason. But nothing about any of these other, I'm going to say this, and I don't mean to be mean, but like the most well-directed thing he's done to me, besides like a Texas Chainsaw, which is like all of his heart and soul, like in his passion, like directed into one thing, was probably Salem's Lot. Like, I feel like Salem's Lot is just like a really well done film, and it's a made for TV movie. And then I'm like, maybe Tobe Hooper is just like, he's really good at like TV style production. I don't know if that sounds crazy, but it seems like even movies like The Funhouse could have been technically that way. And like I don't, does that make sense?
I think Tobe Hooper's biggest strength as a director is creating an atmosphere in a film through lighting, through sound, and through set design. I think he is really good at all of those things. Now, when I say sound, I'm mostly referring to the sound design, like the quote unquote score of Texas Chainsaw and Eaten Alive, that weren't really traditional scores, which he wanted for this. Christopher Young was the guy who did the music for this movie. Christopher Young did like Hellraiser. Like, he's done in most of his filmography or horror movies. And Tobe Hooper wanted him to do something closer to Texas Chainsaw, like something really weird and experimental for this movie. And he did. And he recorded the full thing. And then Golden Globus said, no way. Like, no, we wanted a traditional score. So he had to scrap it and do a whole new one. But Christopher Young said that the score that he had created for this was like his favorite thing he had ever done. And he had to throw it out because they didn't want it. But I mean, you can't, I think Tobe Hooper is a good director. I think he has his faults, but I think that he can definitely create an atmosphere in a film better than a lot of other directors do.
I think that he, I said I didn't want to be mean, like TV directing is a bad thing or anything. And I don't know. I mean, I guess nowadays, I guess I'm thinking like he'd be killing it now as like a director of a series or something like that. Like he would, you know, where it's just, I don't know, I guess the framework would be a little bit different that he's working with then. But I mean, I think he's obviously visionary and that sort of thing, but there's a reason he's not Spielberg too, you know, like it's there that I can see it as we go through all of these things. There's like things that he clearly cares less about than others. And so he wants the atmosphere, he wants the effects, but he doesn't care about anything going on within the scene with the actors. It doesn't seem like.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny you mentioned Spielberg again, because when I watch this movie, it really feels to me like a direct response to Spielberg's films at the time, including Poltergeist, which one of the reasons that people say that Poltergeist was directed by Spielberg is because it feels very much like a Spielberg movie. It's that suburban setting, and Hooper, we should note that he's never had a bad word to say about his experience on Poltergeist. Never had a bad thing to say about Steven Spielberg, really. Now he's had to clarify some things in newspapers and stuff, but it seems that him and Spielberg, I mean, they continued to work after Poltergeist, but the effect of that controversy on his career had to be pretty obvious to him. And I think that he was responding to that a bit in this movie, because there's like this random dolly zoom. It's when it's in the school where Karen Black's talking to the kid, and that's a shot straight out of Jaws.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
And he never does anything else like that in the whole movie. So it had to be like a direct kind of, he was quoting Spielberg in that scene, maybe just for fun. But, you've got the spaceship landing in this that we see that feels a lot like Close Encounters.
Yeah.
There's even a deleted scene where the kid is eating like a candy, and I think you can see it on his nightstand, but it's called W's and W's, I think, which is like M&M's upside down. But that also was probably a lighthearted jab at the Reese's Pieces thing in E.T., and maybe that's all a coincidence, but I kind of think it was Hooper poking a little bit of fun at Steven Spielberg, maybe good-heartedly. I think it probably was.
There's frog dissection like E.T.
Yeah, there is. I mean, well, the classroom scenes feel very much like they're out of E.T.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, the classroom scenes feel very E.T.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that feel very, very E.T.
Well, and that's the thing. I think it feels like this whole movie is almost designed to subvert expectations of this type of movie, specifically because of E.T. Because in this story, if you start like explaining the plot to this, you've got a kid in a suburban town. He finds an alien in his backyard. It starts to sound a lot like E.T., but instead of finding like a cuddly friend like an E.T., he finds these fucking terrifying creatures that are all mouth and giant sharp teeth. It's really like taking that idea and turning it on its head. And I think that's pretty interesting. Like, as a viewer, that's really interesting to me, and knowing that he was probably responding to Spielberg's movies and movies like E.T., because this movie has a lot of lighting also that feels very Spielbergian.
I guess at the end of the day, too, as I work this out in my own brain just on this episode, like it's probably that I think Tobe Hooper is the kind of director that what hurts him is the Hollywood machine, probably really the most, because it's just like you have to let Tobe Hooper be Tobe Hooper and just let him do his thing, because that's really the only way it's going to work. It's he has to be able to just
let his freak flag fly.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like he's going to make something memorable. Now, whether or not it's going to make you millions and millions of dollars, and I get as the studio, that's important to you. But it's just like, also, hey, it's Tobe Hooper. So Tobe Hooper's going to have weird ideas, and they're going to be interesting. No matter what, they'll be interesting.
I kind of wish they had just, in looking at this, and of course we're, about 20, 30 years removed from this movie. 35 years removed from this movie. I kind of wish he'd leaned a little harder into it being almost more of a parody. I think that maybe that would have worked a little bit better in terms. I mean, because there's things that are just kind of downright confusing. Like, okay,
it's definitely not a comedy.
The aliens come in, they get control of NASA, but for some reason they're focused on this 1 6th grader. Like, had they addressed that and sort of dismissed it like a joke and played the whole thing for comedy, maybe some of that stuff would have come off better.
You know what's funny about that is, like, when I was watching, I thought at first that he was going for, because this was a remake of a 50s sci-fi movie, that we were going to have I don't know, it's weird. I was giving him the credit I didn't give in like The Happening for like M. Night, where he now would tell you that the acting is like planned, because it's supposed to be like weird 50 sci-fi movie acting or something. I thought that's what he was doing at first, especially because of that kid. And But then, yeah, as the movie goes along, it doesn't really play into that at all. It kind of is like, no, they're taking it seriously.
Yeah, and I think all of these things, because the film's tone is really weird. It's kind of unclear what he's going for, and I think that probably contributed a lot to the film's failure to connect with audiences. Because, for one, Hooper seems to have been trying to make a family-friendly movie while forgetting to make anything friendly about it at all. Because the monsters in this are pretty fucking scary if you're like a little kid. You know, they're pretty scary designs. But the plot is probably too childish for most adults. So it exists in this kind of no man's land where it ends up appealing to almost no specific audience.
my wife, because she watched this with me, she was like, I wonder if you would feel different about this movie if you had watched it 10, 15, 20 years ago. You know, if you had caught it when you were a kid.
Yeah, but I've talked to some people, or not talked to some people. I've read some reviews of people who did watch it as a kid, and a lot of them were not even fans of it then. Here's the thing: it's not like a terrible movie. I think it's actually a really fun movie that has a lot of flaws. But as a showcase for awesome set design and creature effects, it makes it you're never not entertained by what's going on in the movie. I also think that because Hooper's career began with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which has this really gritty, almost documentary-like feel to it, that people tend to forget that his sensibilities tend to lean towards the cartoony and the weird, which is evidenced by literally every movie he's made since Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like very over-the-top stuff. Now, there have always been rumors that during this time in Hooper's career, all the way going back to Poltergeist, that he had quite the cocaine habit. I saw one writer refer to the movies that he made with Canon Films as Tobe Hooper's cocaine trilogy, which honestly feels right. Like it feels fitting considering how crazy these three movies are. But I think the movie's having fun. I mean, I think it has some deliberately phony looking sets, like the hillside going, over where the alien lands. I think he made that look fake for a reason, because he wanted to evoke the look of that 50s movie, these over the top alien designs. I think it does play into his sensibilities. I think maybe the movie's tone is confused because he is also, like, in the back of his mind trying to make a kid's movie, but doesn't really know how to make a kid's movie.
Right.
Yeah,
like I just picture him on set, like, all right, cut, hey kid, I see what you're doing there, but when you come out of the bedroom and you're running to your parents' room, do it like this.
Really get those arms.
Nobody's gonna say I'm not an actor's director.
And I've mentioned it like on every Tobe Hooper movie we've talked about so far, but set design is obviously a big thing for Tobe Hooper, and you could definitely say the same thing here. Like the set design for that Martian ship is incredible.
Yeah,
I think it's super cool looking. And I also realized watching this and thinking forward to next week, like Tobe Hooper seems fascinated with these types of locations, movies that he'll set his movies primarily in a single location from which there seems to be no escape. It's like you've got the Sawyer house in Texas Chainsaw, or the Freeling house in Poltergeist, the hotel in Eaten Alive, the fun house in the Fun House. And then you've got the alien tunnels here, which feel very similar to the underground lair of the Sawyer family that we'll see next week in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Like that's just kind of his thing. Because even, I don't know if you've ever seen Texas Chainsaw 2, and I don't want to get too much into it for our listeners who are going to watch it along with us, but a big part of that film is set in an inescapable location. And it just seems to be like his thing. Like it's like the bad place, like these places where if you end up there, you're in trouble.
It's so weird to think. I mean, it's easy to make fun of these reviews and pick on them about, I can't believe this is the guy who did Texas Chainsaw. And you're like, you don't want a guy to be stuck in, like one thing.
He can't just keep doing Texas Chainsaw his whole career.
It is interesting just the amount of just everything that like Texas Chainsaw was. It feels like it's tough when you make a movie like that, and it's just like this inescapable terror, and it's like palpable, like just energy and like fright and oddness, and just everything about the movie is funky. And it's just, I don't know. It's like you're always, it sucks because you're always going to be compared to that. And it is like he never quite, he did it to get to Hollywood, you know, like he did all of that. I don't know. It's hard to
his
say,
sensibilities don't really work for Hollywood. That's the whole thing. Like he initially did it with the intention of going to Hollywood, and he made it to Hollywood, and Hollywood shunned him essentially. But his sensibilities don't work for Hollywood. I don't think. I think he's simply too weird. I think his visions are too weird for what most Hollywood studios
like he can't do the studio budget. Like he needs to be the filmmaker that just is like scraping together money and has to make something happen, but he's got creative input, like creative control, I mean, on everything. You know, he gets to do everything he planned on doing.
I can't help but wonder what his career might have been if he had taken a path sort of similar to someone like Romero, who leaned into the zombie thing, I feel like. And
but even that took him a while to embrace, because he resisted doing Dawn of the Dead for a while. But yes, I mean, that undoubtedly shaped his career.
I feel like Tobe Hooper, you know, could have been the George Romero of maybe the sci-fi movie, or, you know, of the Alien movie, you know, as you know, George Romero to zombies.
If there's one issue that I take with this movie more than anything else, I think it's the film's pacing. I think the film's pacing is a bit off, especially in the first half. There's not a lot going on in that first half. I mean, you see the alien ship pretty early on, but you don't see the actual creatures for quite a while. And I feel like, and that's fine, because that's the whole Jaws thing. You know, if you want to wait till the end and build it to that reveal, then that's one thing, but there's not a lot of building of tension. There's not a lot of urgency for a story that's about a small town being taken over by aliens. I should feel like by the end, like I'm like, oh, we got to stop these aliens, or they're going to take over the whole planet. And you never get that feeling from the movie. And I think that's honestly its biggest flaw.
Yeah. I you know, and we briefly mentioned it in the original script that it would have started with him at the military base. I actually feel like that I would have preferred that, for him to start at the military base, and then you wonder
what caused us to get to this point.
Right. When he sits, you know, through the opening credits, like we pan over and see he's sitting next to some woman who's clearly not with the military. We don't know who she is. And like, by the time the movie starts, he starts recounting everything, so that by the time the nurse comes in, you're like, oh, hey, that's the lady in the Jeep with him at the very beginning. And, you know, all that stuff starts to come together. I would have preferred them do that than for the very ending, you know, and it was all a dream. Like,
I fucking hate the ending.
Oh,
but then you're like, was it a dream? I don't know. Because then he sees the aliens again, and he apparently, so he runs in, and like the movie ends with him opening his parents' bedroom door and like screaming, but you don't really see what he's looking at. And the original plan was for him to see one of the alien drones eating his parents.
Oh.
But by the time they shot that, the special effects crew had moved on and they couldn't shoot the scene. So they had to just end on the shot of him screaming. But that would have at least made a little bit more sense.
Yeah.
That it wasn't all a dream. It never was all a dream. Your dad was just telling you that because he didn't remember it because he was taken over. But that would have been a good shock ending. Maybe a little too shocking for a kid's movie, though.
Yeah.
You know, I think the movie's at its best when it does embrace like the corniness of the 50s sci-fi movies.
Yeah.
Like one of my favorite things, like James Cameron knows exactly what kind of movie he's in. He's a guy who says Marines have no qualms about killing Martians. Like only James Cameron could deliver that line and make it sound great, but that's a goofy line that you would hear in a 50s sci-fi movie. Or the end where he's like, "Great Scott, does anybody have a penny?" And like, that's so dumb. Like, how can you take a movie seriously where that's a line in the movie, and the idea of putting a penny in the slot of this organic gun thing would make it fire? That's so dumb. It's so dumb. But like the movie kind of I think it's kind of knowing that it's dumb. And I think that if it had been a little more self-aware like that more often, it would have actually made a better movie.
Yeah, I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier. Just lean into the joke a little bit more.
The reason that they have that Marines have no qualms about killing Martians line in the movie, by the way, is because they had originally approached the Air Force to do this movie, and the Air Force wanted nothing to do with it. And their statement, when they said why they didn't want to do it, they're like, the Air Force's official view is that extraterrestrials do not exist, so they wouldn't do the movie because it was about aliens. But then one of the guys on set, like I think it was someone in the effects crew, was a former Marine, and he gave them a number of someone to call, and they got a military advisor that was a Marine. So that's why they said Marines have no qualms about killing Martians. That's kind of a jab at the Air Force for not doing the movie. And right. The thing with the penny is they were originally just asking for like, does anybody have a penny? And Marines are not allowed to carry loose change like into combat. And I think the guy actually said, one of the Marines actually says that, sir, we're not allowed we can't take loose change into combat. That's actually a true thing that the military advisor told them. They're like, well, the Marine would not have a penny in his pocket, which was how the script was originally written, because they can't take those into combat. So they wrote the thing about the dad like collecting coins for his kid and putting it in his jacket pocket. So that's kind of where that came from.
Yeah.
And when it happens, you're just kind of like, God, I wonder if that's going to come back later.
Yeah. So further viewing, guys, if we're doing a double feature, Invaders from Mars and another movie, what are you going to pair this movie with?
Well, I mean, I think obviously you would have, I mean, you could say any of the movies we already mentioned as far as, The Fly and like other movies based off 50s, but I guess that's not really like this movie.
Doesn't mean it wouldn't make a good double feature.
Yeah, but it could work. I mean, I think
Invaders of the Body Snatchers this movie is very similar to that. Although we said that about Life Force last week, but yeah, even the remake of Invaders of the Body Snatchers, it's a very different feeling movie because it's not like a kid's movie at all. It's very kind of dark, but similar concept,
Yeah, and if you're going for the style of movie, like what it's about, I mean, obviously, like there's all those like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. That's probably the best one, I guess. But there's like Mimic, and there's other movies that do this. Night of the Creeps, kind of similar. Yeah. That'd probably be kind of fun to pair up with this one, if I had to guess. But yeah, I mean, maybe stuff like that.
What do you think, Todd?
Well, I think, again, I've been, championing this thing to be more of a comedy. So I think leaning in with like something like Mars Attacks would be fun. I think
Mars Attacks would work well.
Yeah, I think even you could even go for the Saturday Night Live double feature. Just go ahead and do it.
That would be fun.
I would do it. If we were doing double, this is something where I would watch the original and then watch the current one. If I were to do that again, I'm one of those guys that actually I really enjoyed the original, and I like the newer version of it is The Day the Earth Stood Still. I really enjoy the original. And
I love the original.
I'm one of those few guys who didn't mind the remake. I thought it was okay. And so that would be my other double feature.
I would be remiss if I did not say Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Like, I feel like for some reason I thought of Killer Clowns
tone wise. Yeah, I could see that. Yeah. One that came to mind for me is one that I remember liking as a kid, and I haven't seen it since then because I specifically remember the VHS cover, but I don't know if you guys even remember this movie. It's from probably a couple years after this. I'd say probably 89 or 90, called Spaced Invaders.
Yes.
You remember Space Invaders where like these four aliens come and they're like really short, so people think they're just kids in Halloween costumes?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's any good. I remember liking it when I was a kid, but again, I was a kid and who knew what my taste was like. The other one that came to mind for me and this would probably be
I'm going to say this just because this will never come up again. I'm sorry, Justin, to cut you off. My grandfather died on the night that I watched Spaced Invaders.
Wow. What a memory.
I've always just remembered that movie for that.
I'm sorry for bringing up those traumatic memories, Gary.
I just, I loved my granddad, but I'm just saying, I just remember I watched it that night And that night I was woken up by my grandfather to tell me that my grandfather had died. And
so Spaced Invaders, 1.5 stars.
I'm saying that I'll look up whoever made that movie, but they killed my grandfather.
Well, my number one pick, I think, for a double feature that I think would work really well with this is Critters.
Yeah, I don't know why I didn't think of that. That makes sense.
I think Critters would be a great double feature with this. I think Critters is a better movie than this. I think Critters is legit really good, the first one. But I just think that would be fun. They have a similar tone. The creatures all have big sharp teeth. But, it's a fun alien invasion movie.
Yeah.
So, we talked about this movie coming out, getting Razzie Awards and things like that. Reviews were pretty good, but the audience didn't really go see it. So when all was said and done, Invaders from Mars only made $5 million at the box office during its theatrical run. That was less than half of the movie's budget.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah. With Invaders from Mars, Tobe Hooper had made 2 very expensive failures for Canon Films. But his time with Canon, that story is not over yet. Next week, we will discuss the third and final film that Tobe Hooper made with Golan and Globus, a much anticipated sequel to his breakout film, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. Now, the question is it going to fare any better than Life Force or Invaders from Mars? Well, tune in next week.
I'm hopeful.
Yeah, are you?
I'm hopeful it's better than the first one.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Fucking A. God damn it.
I feel like the first one killed my grandfather.
Wow. You've never seen Chainsaw 2?
No.
Oh,
so you know what's funny is like, as he was saying that, I was thinking, I really do feel like there are people that could make an argument for liking Chainsaw 2 over the original.
We'll talk about it next week, Gary. Save that content for our next episode.
All right.
If you guys want to watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 along with us, head to cinemashock.net. We've got links there that'll tell you everywhere that you can stream it. You can also find all of our episodes on there. You can find a link to all of our series that we're doing, all kind of linked together. Merch, find out where you can subscribe and listen and all that stuff. Everything's there on cinemashock.net. You can also find links to our personal Instagrams and Twitters and all that stuff, as well as the shows, which is at Cinema_Shock on Twitter and Instagram. We're also on Facebook and all that stuff. Where can you guys be found on the internet?
I am at Mr. Todd A. Davis on all the socials. And if you like Star Trek, I have a Star Trek podcast called the Computer Resume Podcast.
I am at This Is Gary Horn on all of the things. And
I am at Justin_Bishop. Sorry, did I interrupt you, Gary?
No, I don't know. I don't care.
Hey, don't you talk about your wrestling show?
I was just going to say I have a wrestling podcast at TIPW Show.
And I am at Justin_Bishop. Until next week.
May the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
And be excellent to each other.
Johnny has the keys, but does anyone have a penny?
That was a good one.
Really want to watch Texas Chainsaw 2, also, by the way, you can get the Blu-ray collector's edition from Scream Factory
$200.
Yeah, for $189.95. So if you'd like to purchase that,
add to cart.